As I promised last week, this week we're going to talk about the practices for the 40 days of Lent, which at first glance can feel like it doesn't fit in with the themes in Ecclesiastes, because it's sort of like we're leaning harder into the very things that the writer names as meaningless. But I kind of think that this book helps us also think more clearly about Lenten practices and clear out some of the clutter that can surround them. First off, Lenten practices are not self-improvement projects, like the writer of Ecclesiastes says. Lent is not 5 steps to firmer thighs. It is not a technique we employ to be our best selves. Lent, instead, is about recognizing that our imperfection is actually the very thing that opens us up to grace. Secondly, while practices for Lent can be and have been used as ways to control people or for us to control our own lives, these practices are not meant to be about control. They are meant to be about surrender. And finally, Lent is not about earning God's love. You are absolutely and completely loved by God, and giving up something for Lent will not change that one bit. You are free to mark Lent or not mark Lent. You see, we don't control God, but practices can open us up to God's love and grace, which is always there, but sometimes we just have a hard time seeing it. And so we're kind of brought back to our theme verse for Lent from last week. Do you remember it? It's this. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. Only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength. Okay, so Lent is the 40 days leading up to Easter, when the church has traditionally fasted in order to prepare to feast on the best day of the year on the Christian calendar, Easter. Lent is also a way that we enter into and tell the story of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. But it isn't just about an outward observance. It is, at its heart, about returning to God, like Isaiah 30 says. So the question is not just, what will I give up this Lent, but what will allow me to return to God with my whole heart? It is about giving up lesser things for the sake of something greater. So you may or may not be invited to give up something this Lent. Maybe you've talked to Jesus this week and there's no invitation there. But this is something I've experienced to be true in my life. It's called the holy shoot factor. A friend once told me that when you're taking a personality test, there's always a holy shoot factor. She didn't use the word shoot, but this is church. She said that whatever personality you really don't want to be is often the one you fit best in, because we don't really like to see or hear the truth about ourselves or who we are, and we're often, even unconsciously, resisting something that we really need to look at. And I think this can be true for Lent. Is there one thing that when you think about giving it up, you just experience this deep resistance, or you try to justify or skim by it or give reasons why you just can't give that thing up? If that's happening in your heart, I would suggest that maybe that this is an invitation. But also, if this is happening in you, let me remind you again that God will not love you any more or any less based on whether you give that thing up. But it does have the potential to help you experience that love more deeply. Giving that thing up might lead to more freedom. It might lead to transformation. So here are some examples. Maybe you're being invited to give up social media. Do you use Twitter or Facebook or Insta or Snapchat compulsively? Like before you even know it, you're just scrolling through. Or maybe you use these things, these platforms, for affirmation or recognition, for that little hit of dopamine that comes with a like or with a view. When you feel uncomfortable feelings like loneliness, sadness, boredom, or anxiety, is there a go-to you use to avoid or numb those feelings? Last week we talked about longing. that underneath everything, there is this deep longing in us for God. And often these uncomfortable feelings are pathways to our longing. They're pathways to God. So giving up the things that keep us from feeling these things actually might be a way to return to God with our whole hearts. Or maybe the invitation is a little bit different for you. Maybe there's an invitation to give up gossiping or speaking negatively about someone or some situation. Or as Joe said, maybe there's somewhere in your life where you can give up retribution in order to make room for restoration. Maybe you need to give up trying to control people's perceptions of you. Perhaps you need to give up justifying yourself or making excuses for whatever is broken or just imperfect in your life. There have been times in my life when I have had to give up control of relationships and situations, and I feel that invitation this season as well. So maybe Lent is an invitation to let go of something and also an invitation to rest. Now, I know that giving up something for Lent is not everyone's jam. Maybe your past experience with Lent has been one of legalism, or it just isn't something that really compels you. That's okay. If you're feeling this way, just skip the question, what can I give up? And instead ask yourself, how can I return to God with my whole heart? So instead of giving something up, you might want to add something. You might want to add a practice of prayer or quiet or solitude. And on our webpage, we're going to have a couple of devotionals written specifically for Lent, if that's compelling for you. Or you might want to revisit or recommit to a practice from the last few months that felt like it was calling your name. Maybe add something for Lent. It's also COVID, and you might feel like enough has been taken away. Fasting from one more thing is just more than you can handle at the moment. I get that. Maybe you need to add something to your life that brings lightness or joy, or you just need a way to count down the days of Lent as we hope for a brighter season ahead. Here are some Lent light ideas that might help sustain you through this hard season. I see you, moms and dads. Sit down with your family and list 40 nice things, kind things that you can do for one another and for others, or ways that you connect to God. Do one thing a day. Or in the past, I've made this into a bingo game. This way, you don't have to feel like you have to do one every day, which can feel like a lot when you're running a household, but you can still fill a line straight down or diagonally, or do a box around the outside. It's motivating for some kids to see it on the page like that, but it's also a way of reminding us that Lent is not about perfection, but about opening ourselves up to God in the real moments of our lives. You could write a letter each day or an email to someone you love or miss or want to encourage. Pray for them before you send it off. Make the list as a family and have each person take turns writing or deciding what to communicate or making a piece of art, especially if you have little people in your home. And if getting a letter in the mailbox is just one thing you know you won't be able to get done, just take a picture of the card and send the picture via text. And this feels like a fitting practice for this Lent when we can't be with the people we love, but we still need to be connected to one another. Finally, I saw a Lenten practice trending where each day you take a picture or write something or draw something based on a word. Words like tradition, hunger, enemy, help, or healing. And it's just a way to be present in a couple of moments of your day, which can help you also be open to God. We're going to have a list of resources on our webpage if you want to explore some of these Lenten practices further. So this week, commit to a practice for Lent. But while you're doing that, also remember that there's nothing that you can do to make God love you more or less. The question at the center of Lent is, what will help me return to God with my whole heart? Remember, all of our longings really are